Welcome to the Raising Cinephiles podcast, a show about passing on your love of cinema to the next generation. I'm your host, Jessica Kantor, and I have worked in all facets of the entertainment industry for the last 20 years, and recently became a mom. This week we welcome Andrew Morgan, who is a prolific filmmaker, narrative and documentary with his most recent film, Texas, USA. We talk about going on the road with his family to make movies, how that non-traditional lifestyle has opened up such interesting conversations and relationships with him and his kids. And I just really enjoyed connecting and talking about parenting with someone with 4 children and who also has figured out how to continue to make films that help shape our culture. Always remember that myself and guests are speaking from personal experience and not giving parenting advice. Let's go ahead and dive into the episode. Hi, and welcome back to the Raising Cinephiles podcast. This is your host, Jessica Kantor, and today I am joined by Andrew Morgan, a documentarian filmmaker whose most recent film, Texas, USA, releases on October 6th across many digital platforms, especially Apple TV and Amazon, which I hope is in most of your homes, especially now that the strike is over. I can say that. Or half the strike is over, I should say. Anyway, Andrew, welcome. Thank you so much for joining.
Oh, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so I'm going to start us off with my first question, which is, what is your first movie memory?
I think my first movie memory is watching the original Ben-Hur, which is quite a heavy movie in hindsight. My mom was really into old movies, and we would all sit on the floor in the living room and watch them. And I remember Ben-Hur because it was one of those like 2 VHS movies, you had to stick the second one in. But I remember it was just completely overwhelming to me, and in a completely amazing way. I'm sure I'd seen stuff before that, but that was the one that I just remember. It literally felt like a different world, and I didn't understand how it was possible, and the scope of it, and the size of it.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's the first one I remember.
How old do you think you were?
I think I was probably 6 or 7, and the reason I think that is because when I turned 8, I remember my dad taking me to the theater to see The Lion King, and that is the first movie I remember in a theater. That's the one that I just was like, oh my God, what is this? But it was after Ben-Hur, so I love the double feature in that year of Ben-Hur and The
The
Lion
Lion
King.
King. Yeah, The Lion King is the first movie I remember. I know my parents took me to the theater younger, but
Mhm.
that's the first one I really stuck with me. Also, it was right before summer camp, and I was going on my own adventure.
It's also funny to think about. I was looking it up recently because someone else asked something about that, and I was marveling at the fact that my birthday's in December, and I went to see it in theaters for my birthday. But I think the movie came out in May, so just the longevity of that run, I was like,
Yes.
oh my God, it's so long.
That's one of the themes I'm learning about this podcast. And one of my kind of fears for my child is that that going to the theater ritual is changing so much and in some ways kind of extinct for the teenagers. And when you think about when we were growing up, we had a lot of time to see the movies. And then it would go to the $3 movie theater,
That's right. And going to those movies over and over again. I mean, I remember so many. I mean, Jurassic Park was one of the first ones where it was like we just saw it all summer. Like we just kept going. Like it didn't stop. Yeah.
You said your mom showed you old movies on the floor. What was your rituals with your family? How many siblings? Where are you in in the ages?
Yeah, there was 4 of us growing up. I have an adopted brother that was adopted kind of after I was growing up. So at the time there was 4 of us, and I am second to the oldest. So I'm kind of
Okay.
right there in the middle. And yeah, we would just it was something that we would do together as a family. And I have 4 kids of my own now, and it's very similar. I think it's sort of underrated in a way. Everyone talks about the value of reading, and there's all these wonderful things to do. But it is kind of extraordinary that you have these huge emotional experiences with other people. In that case, like at home viewing, it's kind of remarkable then that you have these memories that you've created right alongside someone else. That's just a really special thing. And I also think it was one of the few times that I really saw my parents kind of relax, and that was
Mhm.
fun. Like it was not a time where we were working or going anywhere. No one was doing anything. It was like our focus was all together, which is just I would imagine why a lot of people find it so special.
Yeah, I actually spoke with a sleep consultant. I mean, I speak to sleep consultants all the time because I'm at that age. So I'm like, please sleep through the night. And I mentioned the podcast to her, and she said to me, actually, I recommend, especially households with teenagers, that family at wind down activity is watching something together. It's
Mm,
grounding for a family to spend that time together rather than all being alone in your room on your phones. And
yeah,
so that
yeah.
togetherness, there's something to it about coming together, sitting in a room and sharing an experience.
I love it. I love it so much. Was it a big part of your family growing up as well?
Medium. My mom used to take me to movies so she could nap.
I love that so much.
She's, and I remember being obsessed with Cinderella, but I don't ever remember watching it. So it was just like, I
Yes,
must have watched it pretty young, but I would still to this day when I do chores, I sing the song. Like,
that's amazing. That's
um,
amazing. Wait, but
and
when she would do that, was there the pretense of she was going to watch, or it was just like, "Good night, I'm signing off."
it's been our whole lives. Like when I was a teenager, we went to Metallica. She fell asleep. So
The distance from Cinderella to Mattel, I love it. Oh,
yeah, even, in synagogue, I looked over and she like
sure,
closing her eyes for a second. I think it's that she gets her breaks where she can find them.
sure, sure.
Yeah.
But how early was it for you that you really latched onto it as something that you really loved?
Oh, I mean, right away. Like I
Mm,
had a TV in my room as long as my grades were up. I
hmm
watched things over and over and over again. And I think like for me, I think my taste really developed in high school,
mm,
where I started to really be drawn to films and not knowing anything about it. But when I started to learn about cinema in college, I realized my taste was pretty like I had good taste in cinema as, the I liked filmmakers that were known and renowned, and that's what I was drawn to.
mm.
And what about yourself? When did you feel like you developed your taste?
That's a great question. I feel like my taste was really basic growing up. I remember loving Steven Spielberg movies. I loved blockbusters. I loved going to, the big stuff. I remember very specifically you saying a TV in your room. I remember I finally got a TV in my room at one point, and I remember sitting on the end of my bed watching E.T. for the first time. And that was like a really, to this day, that's a really powerful memory because it was the first time I think something ended and I just thought, what is this? And not what is this as in I enjoy it, but like how is this made? What goes into the process of doing this? And then I think I only kind of deepened my taste once I started making stuff because I started shooting stuff in the backyard and running around the neighborhood with a camera in late grade school, early middle school. And that process of beginning to edit and beginning to put things together, that then led me to like it was like this long path. It was like Spike Jones was making skateboard things, and it was like you just kind of kept going down that
Mhm.
rabbit hole. And even coming out to film school in Los Angeles, I remember I was way less versed in like film history than a lot of people around me. There was a lot more. I had a lot of catching up to do. So yeah, I just to this day still love in equal measure things that are very considered high art. And I
Mhm.
also still really, really, really love things that are just accessible and fun. And even now having kids, it's fun to kind of like celebrate both of those things
Mhm.
equally.
Yeah, I mean, I am not discerning. I love all movies. Like I'm going to watch The Meg 2 and then rewatch Jaws.
Yeah,
Like
yeah, 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 yeah. I love it.
I like even if I don't like it, I'm still happy I saw it. But I think it's so interesting when I speak to men and boys growing up how they're I think action sports and sports, they're more encouraged to pick up a camera where
Mm,
when our playing, we don't there's playing the way I was encouraged to play. There was no reason to pick up a camera. There was no culture around
mm-hmm,
holding a camera. But for
mm-hmm,
me in high school, I loved disappearing into the movie theater. So I just would, I lived in New York City, so I would go to Lincoln Square and just watch interesting foreign films, leave
mm.
the world. And then also, I'll never forget like sneaking 40s in to see with me in my backpack while watching The Matrix and walking home through Lincoln Center and seeing like a cat and being like, oh.
It's so funny you say that one because I think everybody has a Matrix story, but I do remember that one being so. I remember walking out and thinking, I've got to learn Kung Fu, which I'm like the least coordinated athletic, but I was so that was a game changer. That one, man.
Yeah.
I just remember being like knocked out for a week. I couldn't get my brain around that one.
Yeah, it was so accessible but thought-provoking at the same time, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah,
It asked
yeah.
really big questions about, is our world real?
Mm,
And I think at the
mm,
same time, I had read Plato's The Republic in high school and
mhm.
was studying the allegory of the cave, and I just started seeing those themes in so much cinema, and that's sort of when I started understanding there was more to cinema
Yeah,
than entertainment. There was depth,
yeah,
there was
yeah,
it's a
yeah.
modern day philosophy in some ways.
This is the most incredible thing too, when this thing that you love, you already
Mhm,
intrinsically love it. You don't even know why all the ways you love it. And
mhm,
then you start to learn there's so much more to love it. That's
mhm,
just an incredible thing. It just kind of keeps unfolding in that way.
mhm.
Where are you with going back and seeing things? Do you enjoy, because having kids has kind of made me, it's given me this reason to rewatch a whole bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting to see how things feel now versus how they felt then. Do you go back a lot to some of those things?
You know, well, first of all, you are definitely a documentarian because you're turning the conversation around.
No, I love this conversation. It's great. This is like my favorite kind of conversation in the world,
Okay,
trust me.
perfect. So there was a time when I just did not want to look backwards. I want, especially as like the content was growing. It was like I could never see it all. And so it was like this race to watch as much
Yeah.
as I could. But one of the things I'm looking forward to most with my son, and not even just with cinema, is going back to classic stories and
Hmm.
rereading literature. And like I actually really want to read his assignments in school
Yeah.
for me and to have a new perspective of those stories that I read so many years ago. And
Mm,
so, that thing, I got him a Tony box, which is this like speaker that he can
mm,
have some agency because the kids don't have video stores anymore. They don't have any like outside of libraries and bookstores and something like that. They don't really get to choose their content. It's all given to them based on preferences that are changing so rapidly.
mm,
And so it's really important to me that he learns to choose and discover and have a curiosity around that. And I think
mm.
we like in today's age we have to be conscious about it. But I just got him like all the Roald dolls and he's too young for them. So I'm going to hold them for holidays and stuff, but some cat and hat stuff. And, he started putting on Llama Llama Pajama. And I was like surprised that was the one he chose. And he's like really into Winnie the Pooh right now. And so, but he'll be watching watching these shows or hearing music and he will pick up a pretend guitar. It doesn't even have frets
Mm.
and strum along with it.
That's
So
awesome.
I think he's going to be
It's-
more into music than movies, but I'll find that genre like that are music movies for him.
There you go. Yeah, you have a whole genre. That's what's great about movies. You have a whole genre for everything. That's awesome.
Exactly. Yeah. But yeah, so that's sort of I am very, very much looking forward to rewatching everything with him and introducing him to stuff and discovering his taste
Mm,
and having conversations. That's the other big theme that comes up in the podcast is the conversations around the stories
yeah,
and what that can evoke, especially
yeah,
as kids become teenagers.
yeah. No, it's huge. I mean, my kids are teenagers now, and I think it gets trickier and trickier sometimes to have like very head-on conversations about something. But when you're watching something, it's almost like there's a third party you can talk about, you know?
Mhm.
Like I've had beautiful conversations where it's like the amount of concern for that character who felt ostracized. And
Mhm.
I know my son is going through that, but it's
Mhm.
easier for us to kind of talk through the lens of this other person that
Yeah.
we're witnessing.
It's been so we've been watching the 2011 Winnie the Pooh. He doesn't like the other ones, the earlier
Mm,
ones or the later ones. It's the
mm,
one that one is the one he likes. And there's a scary song that he's totally into, and then the song that he gets scared and makes me fast forward is when Tigger tries to make Eeyore into a Tigger.
mm.
Is like forcing him to do something against his will that he
Yeah,
doesn't
and
like. And
conform. Hmm. Hmm.
yeah, and he's like, no, 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 no. And I'm like, it's so interesting. That's the thing that's getting him upset, you know?
Yeah, yeah. Kids have such a finely tuned sense of justice. I think that's
Mhm.
one of the fascinating things about kids is that they have an incredible compass, like
Yeah.
incredible. It's so finely tuned so early on. And that is, you're right. It's one of the first things they latch onto in stories is when one character has wronged another, or
Mhm.
that sense of, it's really fascinating to watch that.
Yeah, it's so, especially because we've watched it enough times that he knows the story now,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah,
so
yeah.
he's
Right.
sitting through a good portion of it, and it's the like, when he wakes up at 5 a.m., he comes into bed with me, and I put it on so I can sleep a little bit.
That's
And
awesome.
and he likes the opening a lot, and then we get to this speech by Owl that's really boring, and that's when we have to get up.
Al's always the sleeper in that
Yeah.
story. It's funny too. I wonder if you'll feel this in the coming years. Like I've started to feel a sense, which is really, really strange, where you start to identify with different characters in a movie. You had watched it as an angsty teenager, and you're like, screw those parents, and then now you're like, wow, they have a right to be really concerned.
It's like I rewatched, oh gosh, I don't know, during the pandemic, I rewatched some weird shows from my childhood. I
Sure.
think I watched, oh my gosh, what was the one? It's like the OC.
You'll see. Yeah,
And
yeah.
I was like, "Ooh, the parents are really handsome and gorgeous." And I'm like, so, and all of a sudden, like, it's a whole new storyline of this show that I wasn't paying attention to at all.
Now you've got Sandy's story. You got to
Yeah,
track along with Sandy's morning serves, and
exactly. I was like, I totally would be his friend, going surfing. So yeah, I definitely agree with the new perspective. I want to ask you a little bit about how you found your voice as a filmmaker and led you into some of the projects you're making now.
yeah, I went to after high school, I worked and saved some money, and I moved across the country to, I grew up in Atlanta, I moved to Los Angeles, and I studied cinematography. So that was my training. And when I got out of film school, I kind of fell into making a documentary by accident. I wasn't super focused on documentaries. I definitely at that point really wasn't thinking about directing. Short part of a longer story is I actually lost my dad in a sudden accident, and kind of made a documentary about loss as a way to, I think, looking back, find some personal sense of healing, and had a really incredibly kind of life-changing experience making that film. Traveled around the country and spent time with different people who had lost different people, and had made it through, and made it out okay, and kind of sharing each other's stories, and it was a really beautiful process. And it just kind of it kind of, something inside me clicked. I just
Mhm.
really, I kind of fell in love with it, and I fell in love with the improvisational part of it. I fell in love with the honesty, fell in love with the way in which sometimes even having a camera on let people be more honest, like the sense of something being recorded for a record felt really
Mhm.
special. um, and that just kind of led me on the path that we've been on. I put together a team of some close friends, and we've just been on this journey since. We've been making, independent documentaries, a couple of scripted features, really together. Like, we kind of operate as this little family unit, and it's taken us all over the world, and it's taken us to, these incredible places we never dreamed of. And I love it so much. I mean, I just love it so much. It's like the hardest work in the world. And every time you're like, I don't know if I can do this again. And then you just keep going. But I love it. And I really feel there's something about it that, like, you'll understand this. There's something beautiful where I understand it more than I understand anything else in the world, and yet I could spend my whole life and not master it. And I think that
Yeah.
sense of the extraordinary amount of growth you could see, like every time you make something, it almost feels like it's really cool and meaningful, but you could do better. Like,
Mhm.
the next one's always the one. So yeah, it's fun when we're in a mode like this of releasing a film. It's kind of a cool sense of like pause and kind of looking back over my shoulder and just being really grateful, that we get to
Yeah.
do this, and we've been doing it this way for so long.
Yeah. Well, I have a few follow-up questions, but the last part of what you said reminds me a lot of this, and I've mentioned it once or twice before on the podcast. This video from the guy behind This American Life.
Mm,
He has a quote, and somebody made a beautiful video around it called The Gap.
mm,
And it's this idea that when you start creating work, especially in a creative field, there is a gap between your work and your taste.
yes.
And you have to create an incredible amount of work to close that gap. And you just have to keep
Mm,
creating. And I think that's the idea that there's it's so hard to make something, and you're constantly
Mm,
compromising and
mm,
changing your vision, and you have collaborators, and your vision has to evolve. That's the beauty of
yeah.
especially cinema or television. But then you get to the other side, and there's things that are like better than you could have imagined, and things you wish you could have done better. And then you see every like crack in the seams. And so you go into the next one trying to fix those things that you might fix, and then a whole new slew of things happen. But I think the more you make, the easier it is to achieve your vision.
It's so true. It's so true. I can't tell you how much I relate to that because early on you're looking at your stuff and you're like looking at the stuff you love. You're
Yeah.
like, there's something so different. It's such an incredible thing. There are people who just come out fully developed and are just like, child wonders. But it took me a while. Like it's a difficult job to learn how to do. And I am still learning a lot, but I do feel like, we're 10, 15 years in. And I'm really starting to like kind of feel a sense of the footing underneath me.
Mhm.
Like I think I'm starting to sense of a like an understanding of like how to do certain things that I just didn't 5, 6 years ago
Yeah.
even. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's really fun. That's really fun. And I think that's like the imperfection of it, the chaos of it, the blood sport of it, as you
Mhm.
allude to, like the difficulty of it, the challenge of it mixed in with the beauty of it is really unique. I think very unique from almost any other art form that I'm aware of.
Yeah, well, because it's I was speaking with another director recently, and she really summed it up in an interesting way, which is she had a lot of different art in her. Like she was a
Mm.
composer, a musician as a young person, and when she like taking photographs, and cinema is the only art that kind of combines medium.
It's all
Uh,
of them. Yeah,
yeah,
that's right.
it combines a lot of different crafts together, and so especially as a director, you have to open a lot of your senses into
Hmm.
creating something, and then also keep kind of a linear story in some ways while you're allowing the chaos to whirl, you know?
No, I think it's true. And I think it's taken me a long time to trust some of that. Like, I think early on, I sort of bought into the idea that I had to just have such certainty of vision for all parts of the project. And I think as time's gone on and the collaborators that I work with are so brilliant, like genuinely brilliant, that I've started to be able to trust them more, and I've been
Mhm.
more and more comfortable saying when I don't know something. I think when I was younger, it was like I couldn't be unsure ever,
Mhm.
and now it's a lot more fun when you get to the place where you're like, what do you think?
Yeah.
What do you have in mind? Like, and
Yeah. And I think specifically with documentary, but I think with all form of storytelling, it's always asking question. Like,
yeah,
this a story is in itself is an answer to a question
yeah,
a lot of the times. And so it's interesting your first film was a kind of just inquiring like how did you survive grief?
yeah,
Like that
yeah.
that inquisition, and then you're asking every department like how do we best
Hmm.
capture that feeling from your
Hmm.
perspective.
No, and
Uh,
that sense of curiosity really is like that's like the North Star for me. And I think for any project, it's like it has to start with that sense of I'm genuinely curious and I need to know the answer to something. Like I really need to know. And then the beauty of, people have talked about documentary storytelling being like more like the art of listening, or when you're cutting, it's almost, speaking with 1,000 voices. And it's beautiful because truth obviously is so complex, and it's really cool to not just go out for a singular answer, but to get
mhm,
like a multifaceted answer, which then raises all kinds of more questions.
mhm.
It's a
Yeah.
beautiful search, the whole thing.
It's very much like the way a toddler explores the world. I watched my son spend a half an hour figuring out how to open and close the glass sliding doors. And
Mm,
hiding behind it and getting in front of it, and like just inspecting every detail of how it works to
mm,
understand it. And I'm
mm.
like, that curiosity, that sense of play, that's the work that we're doing every day. And how lucky we are that we get to still do that.
It's really true. And it's a great point about kids being they're really good listeners too. I think about that sometimes with documentary stuff. It's a really beautiful excuse to get to listen deeply.
Mhm.
There's so much time in my life I'm busy and I'm doing things and people are talking to me and I'm not really, and something about when you're in that setting, you get to listen really deeply, and it's amazing how much people have to say.
Yeah.
People they really are extraordinary. And it is, yeah, you're right. I've never thought of it that way, of returning to almost like a childlike sense of curiosity before you were told all the answers, like
Yeah.
before you, quote unquote, knew how this
Yeah.
all worked, to kind of be like, wait, how does this all work? This is
Yeah.
wild what we're doing together.
Exactly. Exactly. And the thing also I think that is I took a lab with a woman named Joan Shekel, and it reminded me that listening one like she forces everyone in her lab to be very present and hold space together, which is what a director does kind of through the
Mm,
course of a film. They hold space for their crew, for their
mm.
subjects or cast, and even for their financiers and everyone.
Sure, sure.
um, and she's always relax your jaw,
Mm,
because if you're tense, it can't let emotion in. And
mm.
like how much you don't just listen with your ears, how you have to physically have your heart open and your jaw relaxed and be, and then what a hard practice that is. It's exhausting.
That's beautiful. No, I liked what you said that a lot. And it is funny because I will sometimes finish interviews and think like, why am I so tired right now? Because it is, the exchange of energy is it's so intense. It's
Mhm.
so dialed in, so
Yeah.
many of the conversations in my life are just kind of like halfway, they're not like there, but it's what you're doing. I mean, it takes something. It really does.
Yeah. I mean, the other question I had for you is you have been doing this with children. And as like a, filmmaker writer myself, with a young child, how? Like how?
It's been such a beautiful process. I mean, I have an interesting story because, my wife and I started dating back in high school, which is insane. And we got married really young and we had kids really young. So it was kind of always a part of the mix for me. And I
Mhm,
think, in some ways it's challenging. In other ways, it was really helpful to me. I think it gave me a sense of drive and motivation and urgency. I also think it opened me up, which I can tell it's doing for you. It opened me up as a person in a lot of ways. I think
mhm,
it softened me in a lot of ways. So in that sense, I think it informed even what stories I was interested in. I think
mhm,
I was looking at it from a different perspective. But we've just kind of treated it like a part of the creative process, like the way we design our family, the way we design our life. If we're shooting a scripted movie, we'll take them on location. If we're, it's not always perfect. The documentary stuff's harder because there's more travel, and they're in school, they're getting older now. But we've taken them to premieres. We've made it a big part of our family, and it's beautiful. I mean, it's like anything, it's imperfect, and there are days where you wish there was more stability, or there's those pressures. But I can say, all in all, looking back, I think when people have kids, they buy into a really dangerous lie, which is fed by a lot of fear, that they need to really settle down and just build the picket fence and almost put their life in neutral and just point everything in the direction of their kids. And I think we've kind of had this attitude like we're doing something with our lives that we believe in, and we're really excited for our kids to be a part of that, and then
mhm,
we're really excited for them to have lives and for us to really celebrate that. But I think that kind of two-way street of like us
mhm,
supporting them and also like our whole family not just be pointed in that direction, I think is really beautiful. And I think growing up, I would have liked more of that in some ways. I didn't
mhm,
understand much about my parents' work or what they were,
mhm,
so I think what we give up sometimes in certain parts of stability or certain normalcy things, I think we gain by a house that has a lot of passion, a lot of creativity, a lot of
mhm,
love. And frankly, I like that our kids are witnessing us doing something that is challenging. I like that it's not, hey, we picked the easiest possible path. It's,
mhm,
we're doing this thing that like we think is just who we are. Like
mhm.
it's what we have to do, and we're going to do it in the best way we possibly can, and we're going to provide the best we can. But I don't know. I think there's a whole lot more adventure left in the season of raising kids than maybe we've allowed ourselves to believe sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm still just finding my way. I do think different kids have different temperaments,
Mm,
and at different ages. I found when my son was really young that I just did not have the energy to do some of this stuff. Plus, we were like, as soon as I had decided, I was like, I'm going to focus on writing instead of directing, and then the writers go on strike. And so, Awesome. So
Yeah,
I'll
well,
try to,
you're still so in the thick of it too.
yeah,
I mean, give
it's the
yourself a
early
lot of
days.
break.
Yeah.
That's such a hands-on time you're in the midst of. Oh my
Yeah.
goodness.
But he surprises me. Like I take him on little hikes and he does it and he's
Mm.
into it and he loves it and he'll walk almost the whole like 4 miles, and it's, so exciting to him. And so, that's the other side of the coin of you don't know until you try it.
Yeah, kids are incredible, and they're way more human than we act. Like they are. I don't know. One of my pet peeves in movies is when they always talk down to kids, or when they like freak out. If a kid hears a curse word, I don't know, whatever. To each his own on how they raise. But I just think they can handle a lot, and I think the building artificial worlds for them is such a disservice. Like they can come into adult worlds in safe and appropriate ways, but they have enormous capacity. It's why so many of us, related to very adult movies as a kid. It's like you want to be a part of the real world. Like
Mhm.
you want to experience like what is happening here,
Mhm. Yeah, making sense of it all. I mean, I know, part of when I was pregnant, somebody told me I should look into rye, which is a
Mm,
form of it's where you kind of get out of the way and let the children lead. I kind
mm,
of did a modified version of that. But,
sure,
it's, no high chairs. They like eat
sure.
at the tables at their height and it's their progress at their rate. And you treat them with agency and with respect.
Mm,
That's the part that, I
hmm
always spoke to my son since I was like, I didn't know what to do. And literally, like, he was, like, 3 days old, and I had this little kid, like, looking at me, and I'm trying to change diapers, and I made it 3 days without changing a diaper because I had the nurses do it and my mom do it, and I was so scared.
mm,
And so finally did it, and my mom was like, "Just tell him what you're doing. Just talk to him. Just talk to
mm,
him like he's your buddy in the room, and just keep talking." So that's what I did. I was like, I'm
mm,
changing your diaper. This is your toe. This is your nose. This is the tree
mm,
outside, just kind
mm,
of an ongoing introduction to the world. And this is the chattiest kid you
mm.
have ever found. He just is like, a big tree, a truck. I saw a truck, like, but
That's
it's literally
awesome.
what I did when he was a baby. And I was like, I didn't agree with a lot of my mom's advice, but that one was good.
That one stuck. Yeah,
That
that's
one's
good. It's so fun. I just am so excited for you. Anytime I talk to
thank you.
anybody about kids, it's the greatest thing in the whole world. And
Yeah.
there's almost no way to overstate how rich and meaningful it is. And for
Yeah.
you as a writer, as a filmmaker, it cannot you cannot help but have it seep into everything that
Mhm.
you make.
Yeah, for sure. So knowing that, you have a whole family in tow, choosing your stories, I think has a deeper cost, a deeper meaning. And so I'm curious, and we can focus on the most recent one that you have coming out. How did you choose that story and how did that fall into your path?
I was thinking a lot about my daughters on this new one. I was thinking a lot about a couple years ago in Texas, the state legislature started to pass some of the most conservative laws in the country, and it started making headlines around the country around voting rights, but also around reproductive rights and women's rights. And I live in Los Angeles, and I remember going to like a rally of some sorts in like West Hollywood, and I kind of looked around and I thought, it's so easy to fight for some of these progressive values in a place like this. Like who are the people that are fighting for this where there's a cost? Like
Mhm.
where could I go that I could look at some of these issues that we're wrestling with across the country through the lens of folks who have been, really on the ground, sleeves rolled up, working on these things for a long time now. And I had a friend who became one of our producers in Houston who just called me and said, "I think you should come down here. There's something happening, and it feels significant." And I flew down there and I spent a few weeks off and on with her, and spent time in a bunch of different parts of the state. And what really kind of drew me in was not the really oppressive stuff that was happening. What was really inspiring to me was the stories of all these people who were fighting back.
Mhm.
And I think that sense of thinking generationally, that sense of seeing this American experiment as a long-term project that generation after generation we're going to have to work to contribute. And that sense, I think, again, going back to my daughters and going back to just picturing the world they're going to grow up in, the country that they're going to live in, some of the rights that they're going to experience or not experience, that just felt like a super, super important story. And it was one that I fell in love with really quickly.
Yeah. It's for I always kind of relate new real stories to movies. And one movie that comes to mind that I think we forget the heavier story in it is Dirty Dancing. And how what Baby does in the film is help a woman get an abortion. And
Yeah, that's right.
and and the consequences of the fact that she had to hide it and go under the table. And and that was a movie set in the 50s, right? It was shot later, but it was set in the 50s. And so we're almost 70 years later, and it's the same thing that we're fighting for, is to not have to go into a back room and get sick and potentially die.
It's incredible when you frame it like that. And I think what's powerful to me too is you hear a lot lately of people kind of just being really cynical about politics and just saying, yeah, like it's not for me. Like I tried to get that one candidate elected, didn't work. I'm out, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was powerful to be in a place where people haven't had the privilege to look away. They haven't had that. They have had to fight for, as you're alluding, some of the most fundamental, basic human rights. And that kind of story, that kind of struggle, that kind of underdog dynamic it's powerful in stories, and it's powerful in real life, and it feels it's crazy you say that, and the way you put a timestamp on that. I mean, every generation in this country fundamentally has to wake up to, and my kids are kind of learning it right now, they have to come to understand that they live in this extraordinary country where there's this gap between, Barbara Jordan has this line where she says there's a gap between the promise and reality of America. And somewhere in between those two things, that's where we are right now. And to see yourself as a part of that struggle, to see yourself as a part of that story, to love America deeply because of that, not negating that, is what I want my kids to have. That's the kind of patriotism I want for them. So yeah, I think in a lot of ways the story was kind of born out of that very personal set of conversations we're having at our own table right now.
Yeah. So, I'm curious because I have not seen your documentary yet. So I'm asking this question blindly, and we can cut it out if it doesn't make sense. But, one of the, especially after becoming a parent, that is intrinsically connected for me is reproductive rights and childcare. And if you're going to force somebody to have a child, what do they get? What do they get? What sort of resources? How do they survive? How does the child survive in this country? And so I'm curious if that subject came up in your doc.
100%. I mean, I think that's the heart of it. I think, Texas is a state that has their numbers around healthcare are some of the worst in the country. And they're one of the states that hasn't taken any expansion on Medicaid, meaning there's federal money sitting there, and out of principle, they have turned it down. The maternal morbidity rates are horrific. It's cut across racial lines, it's cut across economic lines, as you would imagine. There's huge immigrant community who can't access some of the services that you're mentioning. A foster care system that is among some of the most badly in disrepair systems in our country. So it's exactly right. It's a question of saying, are we about life really, or are we about imposing control? And if I can have a very intelligent conversation with someone who says, hey, I'm pro-life and I don't believe in abortion in any circumstance. I know a lot of really good people that we just have a disagreement on that. But many of those people would then also say, as you're saying, but we have a really high bar then on what has to take place in terms of caring for, these folks in our communities. And that is so like horrifically not taking place in that state, and in many states, especially in lower income communities, that to me, that is the reckoning that we have to have. And frankly, that could be a really unifying reckoning, because that is not even saying we're just going to fight to the death on this disagreement. That's saying, hey, regardless of where we are on that, whoa, why
Yeah.
are we topping the charts globally on all these horrific stats around taking care of women as it relates to childbirth and then what comes after?
And I think for me, I still don't understand why reproductive rights is a political issue.
Mm,
Like if someone doesn't believe in it, then they don't believe in it. It's that's good for them. And if someone needs it for health reasons, and sometimes they don't believe in it, and it's a life and death decision. And it's usually a lot of these moments are the worst moments in a woman's or family's life when they have to make these
absolutely.
choices. And to make it political is just so interesting to me that there's no church and state are separate. So why are they not on this issue?
No,
And
it's so true. It's so
um,
true. Well, there's a character in our film she works at a domestic violence shelter, and she works a lot organizing around reproductive rights, but she does it through the lens of, you know, a lot of the women that we're talking about in these circumstances they're not in ideal situations. Far from it. The
mhm,
rates are crazy. And that's why, in a place like Texas, they don't make an exception. The new abortion laws they passed, they don't make an exception for rape or incest. There's a bounty that you can put on the head of someone that is helping someone else get an abortion. So to your point of Dirty Dancing, like there's a $10,000 bounty that you can get for turning someone. I mean, it is a wild, wild, wild departure from who we say we are and who we want to be, taking something that is a very personal, private choice and weaponizing it. Really, like to your point, politically weaponizing something that is so fragile and so personal and so healthcare related should just frankly be long behind us by this point.
yeah, I mean, it is. I think also I had this opportunity to work with an organization in Colombia, not America, Colombia, but the country, Colombia. And the organization went to help young women who got pregnant young for whatever reason, because they didn't have access to birth control. And they basically say, we'll give you childcare and an education if you promise to have birth control and not have a second child,
Mm,
and give them the skills to get themselves out of the cyclical poverty.
mhm.
And, I bring that up because that's the other thing that's happening is we're not allowing families, women to grow or expand to live the American dream because they're just trying to survive with a baby without childcare.
Absolutely. I couldn't possibly say that better. And you relate to this now as much as anyone. I think when you have kids, there's just instantly the sense of we should be creating policies that do everything we can to support families. We
Mhm.
should be supporting people raising children. And there's so many parts of our society right now where that's not true, from early childhood education to like the punishing role that we kind of put on women and the dual expectation, the whole thing. It's
Mhm.
once you're going through it, it is it is wild that we wouldn't want to reward responsible, loving, caring behavior. It's
Mhm.
that's the cornerstone of our society. Like we should be getting behind the people that are doing that, and we should be. I don't know. The fact that we're still
Yeah.
squabbling over things like healthcare, it's like there's so many bigger conversations we could be having.
Yeah. And then you look at countries like Japan who don't have enough children,
Hmm.
and they're having a different kind of crisis
Hmm.
because there's not people taking in the roles to allow social security to take care of the older generation, and like the extreme opposite of what's happening here in America. And you know what can we learn from that? How do we create and celebrate what we have as the abundance here?
Well, and there's just so many policies. It's like my biggest takeaway from making the film, I think, is like there's just so many policies. There's so many things in place that just aren't good enough. And it's so easy to grow up going back again to that, idea of being a kid and kind of be explained, well, this is just the way things are.
Mhm.
And it just was so inspiring to document and follow, organizers, activists, candidates, folks who at great cost to themselves had just sort of refused to buy into that,
Mm-hmm.
had refused to say this is the best we can do. And there's just something really inspiring about that. I hope anyone, anywhere, wherever they are, if something isn't designed well to meet the needs of people, and you see that, you can speak up. You can actually do something. And that's probably the thing I love most about this country is we still live in a place where we can all, in a variety of ways, lean into the process. And who knows, maybe the folks a generation, 2, 5 generations from now will look back and say, wow, those people made a change. They didn't allow that stupid policy that didn't serve people to stay in place.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm curious, I'm going to move to your kids a little bit. Have they, in this thinking, like stood up and said anything internally in your family that they wanted to change? Have they have they
Yes.
spoken up?
Oh, most definitely. Yeah, I'm trying to think of a great example. Yeah, no, they really have. I mean, one of the things that they've shown me is you kind of repeat stuff that your parents did without realizing it sometimes, and they really call that out. And I remember my younger son was one of the ones early on who was like, we need to apologize more. Like, we need to kind of come back around after conflict more. And I realized, like, wow, I grew up in this way where it was like we'd have these big things, and then it was like it had never happened. We just keep going. So, both on the very intuitive, like emotional side of things, I think there's been things like that. They also really value our time together. Like, one of my daughters will get really kind of bothered if we punt on things like family movies or like these kind of core rituals because of the pace of the she like gets really bothered by that. And then there's all the normal stuff, how late bedtime should be, and all the other
I'm
stuff.
not. I mean, I'm getting into the one more book phase, but I know I'm reading a lot that like teenage and toddler are not so different. So your
It's really
background.
funny. There's something about, the imposition of bedtime. It's just so funny. And it's so funny when you know them, you're like, you have to get up so early for school and your days are so big and we just want what's best for you. And man, there's something about that nighttime. They want to keep going.
Yeah. I mean, you're like, don't you realize like my dream is to be in bed by 9:30 and I could stay up as late as I want.
Nothing makes me feel older than that because I'm not that old that I can't remember that feeling of how thrilling it was to be up late. But yeah, now I'm like, no thanks. I'm
No,
done.
thanks. I'm like, oh, you're in bed. Awesome. So I'm going to ask one more question before my last question about your family movie nights. You have 4
Sure.
children, 2
Yep.
adults. How do you choose a film?
Well, the most important part of that question is the choice has to be made beforehand. So my worst nightmare is if we get in a situation where we're all sitting there, we're just going through streaming platforms because, consensus is never going to happen. So we just keep a list of them and we will all contribute, different ideas to that list. And then it kind of will depend on what sort of thing we're in the mood for. There's some times where it's like, we need something kind of easy, we need something just warm and light. And there's other times where we'll, this is a night where we can do something really much, much bigger, much more ambitious. And then also seasons, like we love scary stuff. So like we're getting into that zone right now with October coming up. We definitely like Christmas stuff at Christmas. So, some of it just rotates that way, but it kind of attempts to be a really broad mix. That's what I always want. I always just want it to be, stuff that's just all over the spectrum, high, low, big, small, and just letting them kind of experience things. And then the things that they really connect to, then we can follow up and see more of those things, It's fun. It really is fun.
Yeah, that sounds fun. I can't wait for family movie night, not family movie early morning.
You're going to love it.
All right, so I'm going to ask you my last question, which is what movie should I show my son, and it can be at any age, so it doesn't have to be today, that will help him fall in love with cinema?
Well, I kind of stepped on this earlier, so I apologize for repeating myself, but I think the one that I would point to, because it was still not just for me growing up, but was again when I showed it to the kids, it was one of those moments that I'll never ever forget, is E.T. And I think what's powerful about it is it's one of those ones that it works at a variety of different ages. I think like they can see something like that very young, and there's just kind of a thrill ride to it. And there's something about it. We just watched it this past year, and they're older now, and there was something much more melancholy about it. But there's something about the emotion of that movie that I just think is totally unique. I think it's totally
Mm-hmm.
unique. It just moved me so deeply and continues to every time. So yeah, I don't know what the age is, but at some point
Yeah, at
I'd
some point.
recommend
I'm
that one.
like trying to decide when that one will be appropriate for him, but I don't want to. Sometimes with older films, you want to skew younger.
Yeah,
So I like, 4 or 5. I don't want it to be too early where he gets scared of it.
totally. Yeah, no, it does have a kind of, there is a scary thing. It's funny when ET dies, that scene is so intense, and
Mhm.
it's so much longer than I remember too. I was just blown away by the bravery of that edit
Mhm.
this time. Like, just to linger there the way they do. It's just yeah. It's not a hot take at all, but I love it.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that's great about that film is that there's always screenings in big movie
Yeah,
theaters or outdoors, and so it's definitely a film that he can experience the way it's meant to be experienced. And
absolutely.
I'm going to be pretty particular about, when I show certain like animated films or whatever can happen in my living room. I don't really care.
Yeah,
But like when we start going to see live action, like I want him to feel the experience, have a snack, like
absolutely.
the whole thing.
Well, and there's so many, the repertoire theaters I feel like have never been better. And I feel like, yeah, we've been loving those recently. It is so fun. It is so
Mhm.
fun to see those movies in a full theater. And not just full theaters, but repertoire theaters are great because everyone's there because they love it. Like,
Mhm.
you're already bought in, you know?
Yeah.
I adore that. It's so fun.
Yeah. This has been an amazing conversation. So thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me. Best of luck with everything. I can't wait for all
Thank
the
you.
movies you're going to see with your son. Thanks for having me.
If you enjoyed the conversation, please don't forget to like and subscribe. New episodes release every Wednesday. And leave a comment and let me know which movie you think I should show my son. Until next time, take care.